Okay, perfect. So again, just a few words to introduce myself. So thank you again for the nice introduction. So today I'm going to talk about rare indications and orphan diseases. I've been working in that space across multiple programs to develop health products for different pharma companies. So as you mentioned, I'm a pharmacoepidemiologist by background. I'm happy to welcome any new friends in LinkedIn. So if you want to have my full pedigree, please have a look. But as you mentioned, Professor Wayon, I've been working in that space for about 15 years now, helping different pharma companies to develop their products. And my role as a real-world scientist is to bring additional evidence, to generate real-world evidence to complement the evidence that is coming from the trials. And we are doing this in order to support the approvals of our product, but also to help with drug access or with clinical adoption of the new product. So that's what I'm currently doing for Novartis, where I have the pleasure to work in immunology. But today I just would like to remind you that the opinions expressed are solely my own, do not reflect the views or opinion of my previous or my current employers. And today, so we are going to start with a few definitions. So I hope it won't be a duplicate of what you have heard yesterday, but I thought it would be relevant to mention the regulatory definitions that we are using as drug makers, and also a few considerations from the regulators. So when it comes to orphan drugs, we do have clear definitions for the two key agencies, so from FDA and EMA, and I'm going to share with you a comparison of these two definitions, but both of them are actually based on the prevalence of disorders. So we do have thresholds to define what is an orphan drugs, in which rare indication we can actually get this designation, and how we can then develop the product when it comes to target few patients across large geographies. Something that maybe you also mentioned, but for a regulator, we really target a specific indication, which means that we do not need to target the whole disease. We might focus on specific subgroups. So for example, one product can target a very specific stage of a disease. For example, we can target severe lupus. In that case, I mean, we are really restricting the indication to a specific patient population. And this specific patient population might be aligned with the definitions of the FDA and the EMA. So fitting with the thresholds requirements that they use. And of course, I mean, the regulators are quite keen to encourage and to promote the research in the rare indications. So we do have regulatory incentives from the regulators and in more general from the whole community to help the pharmaceutical industries to also work in that space. So what we can get, for example, is protocol assistance. So we can, if we have the designation for a specific program as an orphan drugs, then we can require protocol assistance from the agencies that can help developing the protocol, helping us to find the best strategy, the best trial design, and so on. Also, and quite importantly for the pharmaceutical industry, we also get market exclusivity with patent extension. So usually if we can get an orphan designation, then it means for the programs that we will extend the patent by 10 years. And if we target a pediatric indication, it's 2 additional years in addition to the 10 years that could be granted. So it's quite important for the pharma industry to also make sure that all the investments we are putting in those programs are also rewarded from the regulators with additional market exclusivity. And also we can get fees reductions for the different procedures, and we can also apply for some research grants. So as you can see, the regulators are quite keen to support us to invest money, time, and resources in those rare indications. And if we look at the regulatory definitions, and I put here a table that will compare the two main agencies. So you have the FDA on one hand and EMA on the other hand. Of course, I mean, the product can be a drug that is used to treat, to prevent, or to diagnose an orphan disease. And it's quite aligned with the two agencies. They do accept product that could either prevent, treat, or diagnose that particular indication. Importantly, for FDA, they recognize that orphan diseases are often serious or life-threatening. For the EMA, it has to be life-threatening or chronically debilitating. So they are not fully aligned on here. The requirement is a bit stronger for EMA. When it comes to the thresholds, so here we have a clear definition that uses the prevalence in the different geographies. So of course, the FDA is focusing on the US, and they ask the product to target a population that is about 200,000 people in the United States. On the other hand, for EMA, they have a ratio which is 5 per 10,000. And this could be observed across the whole EU. And there is also another condition that says that the drug must, the program must be unlikely to generate sufficient returns. So if we already know that the investment is going to be massive and the sales won't probably equal this investment, that's also a way for us to get this designation as an orphan disease. On the FDA side, there is an Orphan Drug Act, which has been released in the 80s, which also secure some financial benefits for the drug makers who are investing in that area. And on the EMA side, there is also something important that says that if there is no existing method for diagnosis, prevention, or treatment of the condition, that's perfectly fitting with the orphan drug designation. But if there is one that exists already, then the program or the drug that we are bringing to the medical community should have a clear and significant benefit over the existing medications. And one of the very first challenges that we have with the orphan drug designation is to make sure that we can get this label for our program. And here on this slide, you see on one hand, you have the FDA summary table that shows what is required when we want to apply for an orphan drug designation. So we have to fulfill a list of criteria, and we have to explain, for example, what we expect in terms of medical benefits for that population, how we believe the drug is going to work for that population, and so on. And on the FDA side, they are also asking for a lot of different informations. But quite recently, they have also reduced the document that we have to submit when it comes to the prevalence section of the document. So in both applications, we have to provide robust prevalence estimates, and we have to show that the prevalence estimates are below the thresholds that they use to define these orphan drugs. And to do that, we do have some guidance on how we should present the information. But if you think of a rare disease, where little is known, where you have so many gaps in terms of knowledge, very, very often you even don't know the prevalence of the disease. So you see that at the very first level, when you have to submit this application, you are already in a situation where it is actually quite difficult to provide robust evidence. So usually what we do at this stage, because we also have some time constraints, because I mean, pharmaceutical industries are quite keen to be fast. So we have to leverage what is already existing. And what is already existing for orphan indications is usually quite poor. So we leverage existing literature, but very often it's very small studies, very localized studies. We can leverage claims, so insurance claims, data set, or electronic medical records. And we do a lot of calculations to just get a number on the prevalence of the expected indications. And you can already anticipate all the limitations with doing that, because we are under time pressure, little is known. So usually what we do is, again, a lot of calculations with a lot of assumptions. So we can extrapolate from one geography to another one. We can extrapolate from one population to a subpopulation to a different age category and so on. And usually, to be as conservative as possible, we put the highest estimates in the document. So we explain all the methodology, how we came to this conclusion, and we provide a range for the number of the expected number of patients across geographies. And again, I mean, if you target the United States, it's only one country. But if you are talking about Europe, it's a lot of different countries. So it's very unlikely that you can get robust prevalence rates for each country in the European Union. So it's a lot of assumptions from the very beginning. But it's not the end of the challenges when we are working in the rare indications. So as I said, by definition, we do expect a few patients across large geographies, which means a lot of different things. And I have to say that this list is absolutely not exhaustive. But if you think of a pharmaceutical industry that wants to start a trial, the very first challenge after the application for the orphan drug designation is related to some operational challenges. How can we set up a trial that will target a few patients across a lot of different sites, or even across a lot of different countries? This is a hurdle for the pharmaceutical industries because it requires a significant investment for sites that might enroll or recruit 1, 2, 3 patients per year. So it's really a difficult situation with a lot of operational challenges for clinical development. And of course, you can anticipate delays in trial recruitments because, as we said, if it's about 1, 2 patients per year, it means that the attention on the trial for the different sites might reduce over time. So it is really tricky to actually capture a big pool of patients that will be sufficient for trials. At the same time, it requires significant investment in terms of resources, money, awareness for the trials, and so on. And also what we see is also that patients might be referred to top centers. So it means that for those patients, it is also a burden. Usually, I mean, they don't have a site that is always sitting close to their home. They have to travel a lot. They have to do a lot of different efforts to make sure that they can contribute to those trials. So it's actually representing a huge burden for both pharma industries, but also for patients. And if we think about the trials and how we could design a study to investigate those patients, very fast, very often we end up in that situation where we have a small population with a very large heterogeneity. And the reason for that is always is very often again linked to the fact that we don't know the disease, we don't know the indication, we don't know the patient. So it means that we can have a quite significant risk of misdiagnosis, like the patients have been diagnosed by non-experts. They might not really fit with the definition of the trial population. The trial population can be based on a very strict inclusion-exclusion criteria, which could also lead to a lot of patients who cannot really participate in those trials and so on. And also what we see is that we have a diversity in the clinical practices across the centers and across the countries, which also give us this perception that it is very difficult to understand the disease and the patient populations, because they can be treated with so many different drugs that it's for us very difficult to understand the full picture of that patient population. And altogether, if you consider the different challenges from a statistical point of view, it's very often a nightmare. Very often you will end up with a lot of stratifications, which will reduce the power of your data analysis. It is very often, if you don't really know how the disease is going to progress, then it's super difficult to have strong assumptions on the primary endpoint, for example. So altogether, this is a very challenging space. And as I said, again, we do have significant knowledge gaps. So we do not really understand the disease. We don't really know how the disease will evolve over time. We don't have any validated biomarker. The standard of cares are very heterogeneous. And altogether, the population is very, is highly underserved. And the feeling we have with the different experts is that we are very often building the plane while flying. We start with the intent of a trial targeting a specific indication, and very often we are going to learn through the process, through the program on this population, refining the trial as much as we can, knowing all the challenges when it comes to trial amendment and so on. Will generate additional real-world evidence to best support the clinical development, to also help with interpreting the data from the trial. So yeah, it's very often this type of situation where we have to deal with a lot of uncertainties. So if you think of all the work we have to do to generate evidence, the best idea is to collaborate all together. And quite often, I have to say, there is a quite strong willingness to work together. So we can meet key opinion leaders, and they have this great idea of building consortium, of having a disease-specific registry, because they recognize that there is so little known on the disease that they need something. They need to pool patient data all together to make the evidence emerging from the data. But of course, if the idea is very great and clear on paper, in practice, again, it's quite difficult to obtain. Again, we do have operational challenges. We have different regulations for registry setup. So how can we build a registry? How are we going to share data beyond one specific site or beyond one country? And we all know GDPR in Europe, which is absolutely not helping with data sharing. We can, of course, understand that it's helping with patient privacy, but it's quite a challenge when it comes to generate evidence. And in that situation of a rare indication, if you have only a few patients within a country, there is absolutely nothing you can say on that patient pool. So the need to have a consortium, to have a multi-country initiative is really critical. And also there is a question about the funding, because if you are dealing in a rare indication, how can we secure funding for those big consortiums, those big disease-specific registries that will take years to emerge and to be developed? And we all know that humans working with humans is not easy at all. So how can we make sure that we are all aligned on the research interest across multiple teams, research teams from different environments, from academic side, from the private companies and so on. So there are so many questions about what we need to do first. What is the priority to better understand that population? And I can tell you that I've been working on some consortiums and some big registries, and it took us a few years before we had a protocol, we had something on paper, just because human needs to first know each other, recognize each other, respect each other before we can actually move forward. And then all the questions about the data sharing, but also the publication ownerships and so on, are very valid questions when it comes to collaborate all together. So a lot of challenges, but I have to say that when we have great initiatives, it is really rewarding. So I'm putting on this slide two consortiums that I had the pleasure to work with. So there is one in Sjogren's disease and another one in NMOSD, which was considered as a subform of multiple sclerosis affecting the eyes, which has been recognized as a standalone demyelinating disorders, thanks to this big consortium led by the Gatwick Jackson Foundation, which is really super active in the field. And something that is super interesting is how two people who have built this foundation are actually parents of a young girl that had NMOSD. And they wanted to advance the field, and they wanted to find treatments for their daughter. But the good news is related to the opportunities that we have when we are working on rare indications. And the opportunities are both for the patients and the research community. So for the patient community, I think the very first positive sign is the new hope for new drugs. So those patient community who might be really underserved by the current standard of care or the current medications, when we have a new idea on how we could develop drugs, I mean, it gives them new hope for new treatment options. Also, what we see is an increased disease awareness. So because there are so many research teams who wanted to collaborate all together on a specific indication, then it could really help to increase the disease awareness across the general public, but also the medical communities. Very often we also see a better diagnosis, and we try to remove the misdiagnosis risk with refining the diagnosis criteria that we would need. And we also observe that usually the diagnostic rates will go higher at the time we start investigating specific indications. And it has nothing to do with creating new cases, because sometimes we have the perceptions that when there is a strong interest from the medical community on a new program, on a new indications, it's like we are creating new cases. We are not creating new cases. We are just revealing patients and and confirm diagnosis for an indication that wasn't fully understood in the past. And also for the patient, it means that finally the disease burden and the impact on their quality of life is recognized. Now they have people who can actually understand their disease, who can also name their disease and understand that their life isn't easy. They have a patient journey that could take years before they get a diagnosis, before they get a treatment. On the pharma side, the nice thing is about all the innovation that we can bring on those programs. So of course, we need innovative study designs when it comes to rare indications. And we are more open to new technologies using artificial intelligence to detect the patients, to confirm the diagnosis, or even to speed up the trial recruitment. From the regulator perspective, there is also an open discussion to consider new trial designs. And for the new trial designs, they are more open to consider real-world evidence. How can we build a trial that will reduce the burden on the patients, because we don't have a lot of patients, but we could use some historical cases to compare the treated population versus the patients who are receiving the standard of cares or no treatment. So it's what we call an external control arm. Or we can think of an hybrid design where we are going to reduce the number of comparators, the people who are taking standard of cares or no treatment, with real-world cases. Because sometimes from an ethic perspective, if we already know that the drug might have a quite large treatment effect, we might want to reduce the number of comparators in the trials and use some historical controls to better manage the ethics part of the trials, and also to speed up the trial advancement. We can also consider pragmatic trials. We have plenty of options and designs. Here I've also put tokenization, which means that beyond the trial evidence, we are going to link the trial participants' information with their real-world records. So a trial participant will generate evidence in the trial by all the information that is collected in this experimental setting, but we could also link that with the real-world data that are generated for those patients outside of the trial. So that's another way to augment the evidence by using different tactics. And on this slide, I also wanted to share with you the regulatory perspective on how real-world evidence can actually support the development of new drugs, especially in the rare indications. So you can see here from both FDA and EMA that there is now a willingness to include real-world evidence in the regulatory path, in the regulatory decision-making. So they have provided new guidance on how we could use the real-world evidence. How can we make sure we are using robust evidence in addition to the trials to make sure that we can speed up the process and we can bring new treatment options to the patient populations. And for us, it also means that we have new opportunities. And I really recommend this paper that you can see here about the trial designs that have been proposed to the FDA or the EMA. And for those designs, they have been using real-world data. And the objective, again, is to speed up the whole process, to make sure that the patients might benefit from a safe and an efficacious medication at the right time. And in this paper, you will find all the different cases, all the different examples where real-world data was used. But Until very recently, real-world data was used as a supportive information. So the FDA and the EMA were quite conservative, and they were wanting, they were willing to integrate the real-world evidence in the regulatory package, but still as a supportive piece. And very recently, we had a really nice example where the FDA has approved a new product for a very, very rare indication based on real-world evidence only. And this is really the very first example where real-world evidence has been used not as supportive evidence, but as the main piece of evidence for the approval. And actually, this project is about the accelerated program. So they have been able to reuse the information from the patients that were treated by those accelerated programs. Here it was in France. So they were able to leverage the treatment experience from a few sites in France, and they were able to submit that for the approval of this drug for a very underserved patient population. So that's a really nice success where both the regulatory agency but also the pharma company was open to work together on advancing the treatment options for that population, and also advancing hand by hand on what we can use as an innovative piece to make sure that this patient population can get the drug. And now I think we are close to the end of my presentation. I would like to share a few thoughts from my side. So again, I'm quite passionate when it comes to an orphan drugs program. So I'm quite keen to work on those programs because I do believe they give us the opportunity to push ourselves out of the comfort zone. So it's all the time about being comfortable with making decisions with a lot of uncertainties. So when we advance the program, we already know that we have so many knowledge gaps that we have to be comfortable dealing with some decisions where we have little knowledge. But we are doing this with the intent to better serve the patient community. And this is really a rewarding space. Again, a lot of patients, from the medical community, but also the patient engagement is incredible in the rare indications because they are so underserved that very often it comes from the patient community to start something, to start a consortium, to start pushing the pharmaceutical industry to advance programs and so on. So they're really engaged in the clinical development of those medications. As I said many times, for us, it's a clear contribution to a very underserved patient populations. And again, we have to adopt a very innovative mindset. We cannot develop a drug in a rare indication by using the typical clinical development. We have to be faster. We have to be conscious of the ethics of all the challenges we are going to face when it comes to recruiting those patients in the trials and many more. I'm not saying it is not applicable in the more prevalent indications, but I think it's especially true for the rare indications. And to me, those orphan drugs also resonate with the future horizon that we will have when it comes to developing drugs, because I think we are moving to a space where we can, where we have been using drugs for large populations without tailoring the drugs to the individuals. And now we are moving to this new era about personalized healthcare. How can we better provide drugs that will totally fit with the patient profile? How first can we understand the patient profile? And then among the different treatment options, what is the best one that will fit the patient needs? So I think moving towards this direction in personalized healthcare is super interesting. And for me, rare indications are totally fitting with this direction as well. And I think I'm already done with my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and I will pause here.